The Sage Women podcast shares real conversations with women and health professionals, and it's for anyone navigating the ups and downs of midlife. I'm really thrilled to be here today with Michelle Hasani and Rebecca Hannan. We've been collaborating on an exciting project around work by design. And I suppose the purpose of this episode is really to talk about why work design matters and how it can impact the lives of women and men, I suppose, in midlife and in many different contexts. But in this episode, we're really focusing in on women's health and mental health and what needs to happen for people to feel comfortable at work, to be able to make autonomous adjustments, and how they can really take charge of their lives. So firstly, Michelle and Rebecca, thanks and for being here and chatting together today.
Hi, and thank you too, Melanie.
Yeah, it's good. So Melanie,
I guess,
how about... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was going to start with asking you a question. So how does women's biology shape our experience and work, engagement and ability?
That's a great way to set the scene, Michelle. Thanks. And I suppose I've just done a course with Dr. Sarah Mackay, the neuroscientist, and it's based on her Women's Brain book, which is really insightful. And she brings to life a model which she calls the bottom up, the top down, and the outside in. And so if we look at the factors that shape a woman's brain and her health across the life course, the bottom up is the biology, the genes, the habits, the things that we do to take care of our health. The top down is our psychology and our emotional health. And the outside in are all the people and situations around us that influence the way we feel. And I guess another way of calling that is the biopsychosociocultural model, which is a bit of a mouthful. So I really like Sarah's discussion of that. And I suppose for women, if we look across the life course, there are these windows of hormonal change, particularly puberty, pregnancy, and perimenopause, the 3 Ps. And they bring deep psychological and neurocognitive shifts and rewiring. So if anyone's listening to this and they're thinking, I had this mummy brain during pregnancy, or I've had brain fog during menopause, and Rebecca and Michelle, maybe you can relate to this a little bit to people that you've worked with. A lot of women are talking about these symptoms: memory loss, brain fog, reduced focus, and of course, good old sleep deprivation. And so these things are real barriers for women. And what happens when they're not addressed is that women tend to, what we see anyway, is they tend to work harder and silently in the background trying to keep up, but also feeling like they're not themselves, losing a bit of confidence. And if we don't have the right support for women during these stages, then they're potentially going to reduce their performance, maybe step away from work for a while or permanently. And I suppose another aspect to that too is the diagnosis of ADHD and other neurodiverse conditions in midlife. If we think about the overlay of that, it's really interesting because we'll see women that are struggling with organising their time. They need longer to process, perhaps. They're a bit unclear on how they're going to manage their tasks. They feel like withdrawing a bit and maybe need a bit more personal space. So I think these, like, to set the scene for our chat today, especially around midlife and transitions, we really need to look at how we can support women through such stages and to get out the other side and to bring their greatness, their wisdom, their perspective to the fore.
So what's your thoughts on why we need a common language to change the narrative around menopause?
I guess it's just that thinking it once again about Sarah Mackay's course that I've just done, there's a lot of research showing how the outside in element of neurobiology really influences our experiences of the world. And so as long as there is stigma and taboo around things like menopause, then women are going to have a worse experience of that. They're going to feel shamed or judged. And we certainly hear women talking about that, not wanting to be seen as less than. And someone once said to me, nobody wants to be the beetroot at a meeting. So when there are these stigmas and taboos, it makes it hard to talk about. It's stressful. It can make our symptoms worse. So I think we just need to have a deeper look at what's a way that we can give people a common language to talk about our health concerns or our mental health or anything else that's going on, so that we can bridge the gap between that silence. I'll just tuck myself away and beaver on, and hopefully nobody will notice my incompetence, that kind of feeling that women have, versus the support they actually need to adjust what they're doing and work better and feel better about themselves.
Right, thank you. So what do you think are some simple ways we can increase empathy in the workplace?
Yeah, empathy is a really interesting one because it's an essential workplace skill. It's really important for supporting people through invisible or difficult, complex challenges. And I think there are a few things that we can do, but three that I've been thinking about is firstly, and leaning into what I've just been talking about, is creating this space for open and non-judgmental conversations so that people can talk about what's happening for them and feel okay to do that. And that helps people to get help sooner. I've heard of women going through menopause and they've got these symptoms that have been bothering them for 2, 3, 4 years. And that's a long time to be affected by something when you could actually go and get help if you really knew what was going on. So open conversations is part of that. And I think we also need to train for relational intelligence, not just technical skills. And what I mean is often at the day-to-day level in work and in life, we need to have better ways of communicating and listening and understanding each other. And we also need a better understanding of our strengths. We tend to live in a deficit world and a deficit language where a lot of people are judged on their performance and what's not worked. And when we look at people's strengths and how we can leverage each other's strengths, it's a lot more collaborative and it's a lot more uplifting, and it creates a sense of belonging, which is so important for engagement. And the third thing I think is to co-create wellbeing plans. So bringing employees into the mix. A lot of the initiatives that are being rolled out around menopause are saying, please consult with your workforce. So doesn't it make sense to bring everyone together and say, how can we work together to improve the way we work? Of course, within the bounds of company requirements. So I think those are three ways we can increase empathy by increasing understanding. Thanks, Michelle. And I guess I'm going to pass over to Rebecca now to pick up on the threads of agency. And maybe, Rebecca, you're going to be talking about mental health impacts in the workplace. And I suppose my first question to you is, in your experience, why is building agency a key part of improving mental health for individuals and for teams?
Yeah, so thanks, Melanie. Yeah, so agency is somebody's capacity to be able to operate within their own environment. So to give a person agency really sort of helps them to feel empowered to do their best work and to show up without having things. I mean, there's elements of having to have things imposed upon you within the workplace. That's how it needs to be. But if you've got a sense of agency over what you do, you're feeling like you're able to show up and do your work much better. There's consistent studies that show that by having a sense of agency, it reduces stress, it reduces the risk of burnout, and also risks of depression as well. So that's why a sense of agency helps. It also helps people to feel motivated and engaged in the work that they do. These also help people to have that real sense of ownership in their work and that real sense of pride in the work, and that those feelings of belonging and having it is really crucial to people feeling like what they're contributing in their workplace is really important. The other thing that it also does is it helps to build trust and connection amongst teams. So when people feel like they've got control over what they do or levels of control over what they do, it helps everybody else to start feel supported as well, because you're all coming forward in your best way.
Thanks, Rebecca. As you're talking, I'm just thinking about how we often wait to be told what to do or how to handle things by the boss, but actually there's so much we can do ourselves and how we can support each other to build that agency.
Absolutely. And within each of us, we all know on an intuitive level what works best for us. And it's being given that sense of being able to do that.
Mm. So what do you think are some missed opportunities to create agency and connection and autonomy in the workplace?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, I guess, and workplaces aren't necessarily doing it intentionally, but there's a lot of imposed things that are placed upon. So we might have people coming together and going, okay, let's try a wellbeing app, let's try this, let's try that, without actually consulting the workforce and the people to find out what's going on. So if we look at a woman who is going through perimenopause or the, you know, sort of reaching close to that menopause transition, they're having terrible sleep, they're feeling flustered, they've got brain fog, you know, sort of imposing things upon them without going, hey, you know, I've noticed that things aren't going so well for you, don't quite seem yourself at the moment. How can we best support you? You know, sort of imposing these changes onto a person doesn't help them to be able to navigate that themselves. Other missed opportunities. I heard you speaking before about the sort of the emotional literacy around those sorts of things. You know, having the skills to be able to ask the questions and to ask the questions in respectful ways that get the answers that they're looking for, because often it's one of those topics that has been in silence a lot. It's shameful. A lot of leaders don't feel comfortable in asking the questions because they don't have the skills in it. So so having language to be able to ask those questions and scripts to be able to do it is also really helpful. Often too, looking at it as an individual problem and leaving a person to be able to leaving a person to sort of battle on through without looking at some of the systemic issues that maybe need to be addressed. And you touched on before about the overwork. Well, women are a lot more at risk of burnout, and that's largely often due to, you know, sort of competing work conflict that goes on, as well as that suffering in silence as well that doesn't help very much.
And all the other things we have to do at this stage of life.
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, we've got the aging parents, the kids leaving school. Sometimes we're becoming grandparents. Yeah, there's a lot going
Yeah.
on.
We often become that sandwich generation, don't we? Where we, like you're just saying, then you've got aging parents, you're juggling your career, your work, and often people have still got children at home or grandchildren coming along. So you're kind of sandwiched between, all of these competing factors that create a lot of stress.
Yeah, it's a big cognitive load, isn't it? And so then I suppose if we were to co-create mental well-being with employees, uh, what would that do to change somebody's capacity and confidence?
Yeah, so there's various different ways that you can look at it. It can be through cognitive, so looking at how a person's looking at their work, how they're approaching it. We can also sort of look at different ways along how those tasks are done. So again, if we look at it through the lens of an individual going through menopause, you know, if they're a little bit foggier in the morning, maybe lighter tasks in the morning until things warm up a little bit more. So it could be offering some different types of flexible work arrangements. So it might be, you know, the opportunity to be able to work from home or remotely one day a week or at certain times. Also, in terms of the relational side of things, you know, sort of helping teams to be able to work in a more cohesive way together, to be able to understand what's going on for each other, supporting each other, like you mentioned before about the strengths, working with each person's strengths as well are really helpful things that workplaces can do.
Mm. Thanks, Rebecca. I think Michelle's probably time to talk, unmute and have a chat. Rebecca, would you like to ask the questions or shall I?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. So, hi,
Awesome.
Michelle. So your work focuses on how wellbeing underpins leadership and culture. What are the top two wellbeing gaps that you see in the workplace?
I think that the first is around wellbeing still being seen as separate from from how we design work. So many organisations are really well-meaning and they want the best for their people, but they're often relying on add-ons, so an app, a program, or an incentive rather than embedding it into how we design our work, our workloads, our role clarity, decision making, flexibility, and ultimately our behaviours at work, particularly our leadership behaviours. So when people don't have real agency over how their work is structured, what we see is it quietly erodes connection, confidence, and their capacity in the long term. So that's probably number one. And the second is a big gap in psychosocial safety and courageous conversations. And you touched on this before about how leaders don't have the language skills. And I think if we look at the work of Brene Brown, she talks about vulnerability, trust, and brave dialogue being foundational to those strong cultures. Yet when leaders feel ill-equipped to have those honest, human-centered conversations around performance, boundaries, health, and life pressures, those conversations don't happen. And Mel touched on this about where people feel isolated, or it's that silent, that hidden conversation. But what happens is it actually creates a lack of trust, and people disengage rather than lean in. And I guess what we need in workplaces and around culture and leadership is people to be able to lean in, and rather than having poorly designed work and avoiding conversations that lead to burnout, disengagement, and then that culture strain. Because if those two gaps continue to exist, it's inevitable, even in really high performing teams, that we'll see the cracks start to show up.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah, thank you, Michelle. It's interesting you did say about the avoidance, isn't it? Really, because that is a common one, isn't it? People don't know what to do, so it's like, oh, I'm just going to avoid it, and that leaves people feeling unseen and unheard and not valued.
Yeah, and I think if you lean into that vulnerability, it's okay to have a conversation and not quite get it right, because if you're showing empathy, which Mel talked about, being one of those leadership strengths that needs to be in workplaces, it's okay to give it a go, not quite have it right, but if your intention is honest and empathetic, people tend to work with you and alongside you rather than actually just go, this is too hard.
Yeah, such an important point. Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And so in your experience, what's the most effective way to bring people together and build stronger connection in a workplace?
I think there's a couple of things, but shared purpose, looking at things from a strength-based perspective, particularly leadership, and then that intentional work design. So when people understand not just the what they're doing, but why they're doing it, it actually brings people together and helps them feel part of a bigger picture. What we see is immediately confidence lifts, there's a stronger sense of commitment, and purpose brings people something to belong to. I think that's important. Like, we spend a lot of time in our workplaces. And so if there is no sense of belonging or purpose, then, who just wants to do a list of tasks? It's got to have that meaning and stuff. And I guess then the second layer is creating that real sense of appreciative culture where strengths are genuinely noticed and used. And because when people feel that they're seen, and that what they bring to the workplace is valued, it creates that deeper sense of connection, confidence, and people grow in that space. And so then having that flexibility in how you do it, particularly when we're all, everyone, every age goes through different transitions, being able to create an environment where, even though you might be going through different transitions, you're showing up, and if your strengths are recognized within that and your work is structured around that so that it brings out the best in people rather than people feel like the load is so heavy that they actually can't give their best in anything.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. And that strengths based is so important, isn't it? It really, sort of links in lovely with a person's sense of agency as well, isn't it? When we're working to our strengths, we're really able to do our best work as well, aren't we?
Yeah. So. Yeah, I think it like breaking it down. It's making sure that work's stimulating, because what that does is builds confidence through meaningful challenges. You know, the agency brings people real control over how they work. The relational design builds that connection through trust and collaboration. And then the tolerable demands protects people's capacity so that people are not constantly in that overload or overwhelm. And I often hear a lot how overwhelming work is. There's a constant, you know, people are working in fluid environments, you know, and it just seems heavy. And I guess what we want to do is be creating environments where people feel confident, capable, and connected, so that they're not just burning it, like, you know. And also the other bit is around rewarding people's sustained performance rather than rewarding burnout, because often what we see in environments is that we reward the negative, and we actually want to shift from that.
Yeah. The hustle and the burnout can often sort of be seen as that badge of honor, can't it, really, as opposed to taking care of yourself. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And so what flow-on effects do you see across teams, groups and departments when this connection is strengthened?
I think the ripple effect is huge. You know, like if we look at some of the statistics, 20% organisations that integrate wellbeing effectively report up to 20% increase in productivity and reduced absenteeism. A workplace culture that supports psychological safety, described in research as strong psychosocial safety climate, predicts lower rates of burnout, reduced absenteeism, and stronger engagement and retention over time. And when work's designed for skill use or autonomy and meaningful challenge, people report higher job satisfaction and a sense of purpose, which drives sustained performance rather than quick wins. So as a result of that, teams communicate more openly. You see more innovation. Psychological safety becomes the norm rather than the exception. And retention is improved because people feel supported, they feel valued, they're able to work in a way that suits their life stage and their energy, which is really important. And at that organisational level, we see resilience increase. We see teams coping better. You know, the cost, the return of investment is, I think there's lots of different stats around, but it's as low as one in four, what is it, for $1 spent, there's 4 times return. And I've seen stats that talk about for every dollar spent, there's 8, dollars return in investment. So it's a small investment really for long-term benefit, regardless of which of those stats, like you use. And in simple terms, what we see is when we design work for human well-being, performance becomes sustainable rather than extractive, and cultures become more of a competitive advantage rather than a risk. And I think that's probably the biggest flow-on effects that we see.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about the that return on investment and the cost. So when you think of from that menopause lens, a woman leaving work or cutting back at that stage of your life can be really costly to organisations. It's something that isn't always considered either, isn't it? So.
And then that cost flows on, so it's the cost to women in terms of potential loss of income. It's the cost to their families in terms of sustainability of, the cost of living and how it impacts. It's then the cost back to the organisation if they have to replace someone. It's the lost IP or the relationships within organisation, that history and knowledge that you can't just bring a new person in and have them pick up,
No.
So, I think the flow-on effect is huge. And then for women who try to if they do need to leave the workplace rather than have their work adjusted, they often find it really, really difficult to find work again because unfortunately ageism does exist in recruitment.
Yes, it does.
And so that then has an additional flow-on effect in terms of the overall well-being of women in our community.
It's a huge ripple effect, isn't it?
So,
Yeah.
you know, on the plus side, organisations thinking about work design early actually is a better result than waiting till the wheels fall off, and then the ripple effect on the negative side outweighs the positives, you know, of small adjustments that can really help people to show up and be their best at work.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Michelle.
No worries.
Thanks, ladies. It's been a really interesting chat today. And I think what stands out for me, going right back to the beginning, is that the way we show up, our health, our well-being, our ability to work is intersectional. It's our biology, it's our psychology, it's the outside in, our identity and sense of that, our lived experience, the workplace culture that we're exposed to, and the leadership practices. And so if that is what we're facing as women, and whether it's to do with midlife, menopause, hormonal changes, or whether it's mental health more generally, it's really clear to me that we need an intersectional solution for the intersectional challenges. And so the three of us have been working on work by design, which is leveraging some of the aspects of work design that are really multifactorial. And if we think about a menopausal woman who's struggling with certain tasks, she's got brain fog, she's taking longer to process. It's about working with her on how do you recreate your tasks? How do you leverage your strengths and build relationships at a time and get support that you need? And then how do you reframe your thinking about yourself and your capability? And when you pull a team together to do that and work together on that, it's really connective. And I know, Michelle, you spoke a lot about belonging and isolation. I was listening to a podcast this morning from the Institute of Coaching about this and the impact and cost of isolation. And it shortens lifespan and all sorts of things. Like what do we do to bring people together and work on this together? And we all mentioned, I think, the importance of consulting and engaging and involving the employees. I mean, it's such a great solution because if you're thinking about autonomy, which we've all spoken about today, giving skills to people so that they can autonomously adjust what they're doing, make sense of their work, have a greater connection and deeper sense of meaning in what they're doing and the relationships around them. There's only wins.
Yeah. Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And they're big wins too, aren't they? They're not small wins. They're big wins for organisations, families, communities. They're really big wins.
Yeah, how exciting would it be to rock up every day to an environment where you felt like you wouldn't be judged because of what's going on for you on that personal level, that you can trust the people around you to go, hey, it's okay, we got you today, you know, and knowing that you can just give your best on that in that time, and that's then supported, and that you've got a collaborative environment around you. You know, it's a win. People would feel excited to go to work in that environment rather than dreading the fact that they fear how someone might judge them because they aren't, you know, 100% every day, you know, and then that lack of trust, you know, because it just erodes everything. So for me, I really want to be in that environment where, you know, it was supportive, it was adaptive, it was flexible, because that actually means that it brings the best out in me as well, and I'm sure everyone else.
Yeah. I agree, Michelle. Yeah, it's interesting. It was reminding me of when you first spoke before, Mel, about how a lot of women in middle age start to become diagnosed with neurodivergency, and you were saying about the shame and the stigma, Michelle. And it's interesting because as women we are socialized to mask things, so diagnoses on things can be harder to show up because we do a lot of masking, and it would be wonderful to be able to feel supported, you know, so that you can show up and do your best work without that whole having to push through and pretend everything's okay when it's, you know, people are genuinely struggling during this time of life.
One other thing I think really stands out for me in this conversation, and I think, Michelle, you touched on it a bit, it's just communication as a core capability,
Yeah.
like the way that we relate to each other. I remember being in a workplace where I'd come in and someone would say, I'd say hello and they'd say, don't talk to me, I've had a bad night. Okay. Next day I come in and don't greet them. Why aren't you saying hello? Like, I can't win. You know, if that's the way the day starts, that's setting you up for the attitude that you bring into your work, you know. And
Yeah.
if we all learn to be a bit more respectful and aware of other people, and it's hard when we have high job demands, right? Because you're in that stress brain state. All you're thinking about is your work, your tasks, must do, must do. And we lose that human connection. And I think, Rebecca, you're also talking about apps too. There's also maybe that sense of dehumanizing workplaces through
Yeah.
too much technology and internet and not internet, but AI, all of these things that are coming at us. Working from home, we're getting more and more siloed and isolated. We actually need to bring people back together and focus on the core skills of human interaction and respectful communication.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's interesting because when you think about language, it can either be healing or harmful, you know, so it's
Absolutely.
like, you know, the person that you showed up to who you didn't know where you stood each day, introducing empathy and healing language to you know, to that conversation can change it really significantly. You know, so really sorry you've had a hard night. How can I help you? What do you need right now? You know, it kind of actually opens a dialogue rather than just being closed off. And then helping people to understand that self-empathy is just as important as empathy to others. And if we start with that, it then opens up how we navigate all of those difficult conversations, all of the way that we, you know, look at flexibility, look at everything else, because yeah, we can't know what's going on 100% in someone's world, but if we show compassion and empathy and kindness, you know, I think it just changes that landscape quite significantly.
Yeah.
And it can be as simple as sorry?
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say sometimes it's having a list of phrases that you know are just prompts, so that when you get stuck and you don't know, think about what list do you need to pull from your language list that you can kind of ask a question in a kind way or something like that. So, and
A toolbox
remember,
of scripts.
yeah, and just remembering that, you know, vulnerability and honesty will get you a long way. It doesn't actually, you don't have to always get it right, but you've got to try.
Yeah, yeah. And these skills we're not really always taught, are we? You know, we're not often not things that happen in our families, or they don't teach you that at school, or those sorts of things. So, yeah, but they're very important skills to be able to have to help with that relational aspect of things, isn't it?
Thanks so much, ladies. Really enjoyed chatting with you today and look forward to catching up with you again in the future and having more conversations about why people need agency and how work design, designing work can make a big difference.
Thank you. Thanks, Mel. Thanks, Michelle.